It's time now for Perspective. This Friday we'll see the second meeting of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council here in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of the year vowing to make gender equality a key priority of the French G7 presidency. The Council's remit covers everything from sexual violence to the gender pay gap and the educational opportunities available to women and girls around the world. Well, I'm joined on set now by Alice Albright, who's the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education. Thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us on France 24 today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. So you've been invited by French President Emmanuel Macron to be a member of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Committee. You're meeting for a second time this Friday. What's on the agenda?
So we're continuing to work on looking at overall package of issues on gender equality, in particular, in our case, our little group, education and empowerment. And we are making a set of recommendations to the G7 about how gender issues can be featured overall in the G7 agenda.
Now, we hear time and time again that education is the key to gender equality. Why is that?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is key. If you look globally throughout the world, you see in particular in developing countries that girls are not in school at all levels. And so if you think about the impact of that on societies, it's keeping girls out of the workforce, not having the skills they need to contribute to not only raising their families, but also earnings. It also has a big impact on the level of early childhood marriage. So there's a number of reasons why not having girls in school is problematic.
And what is keeping girls out of education, particularly in developing countries?
There's a number of reasons. One is certainly overall poverty. There's not enough money going into education. And so what tends to happen is that where there is capacity lacking, it is the girls that are often kept out of school. So it's a combination of financing and poverty situations, but it's also a combination of what I would call sort of societal and social moray issues. When there's a choice to send a young girl or a young boy to school, often it's the girl that's kept out.
And how do you go about tackling that societal element? How do you change society's perceptions of what a girl can be capable of?
Well, first of all, you have to build the awareness. Many people don't know about the deficits that girls face in getting to school. You have to build capacity, in particular getting more female teachers in the classroom, not only in the capital cities, but out into the rural areas, helps a lot. Governments also need the financing base in order to provide adequate schooling to everybody. So it's a range of things. The advocacy piece also has an important role to play. I think that many people don't understand the extent of the issue. And so we need to build advocacy both at a grassroots level all the way up to global level.
Now, we hear a lot about the importance of educating girls, advancing their chances in life, but what about the education of boys? What role does that play in this wider issue of gender equality in education?
Well, first of all, we need to provide education to everybody, no doubt about it. But in particular, we need to, again, raise awareness among boys and men that there certainly is an issue facing girls. And on the Gender Advisory Council, there are a number of men involved, which is fantastic because they can become fantastic advocates and champions around this. But one of the reasons why it's important to educate boys is to make them aware, but also make them aware of the capabilities of their sisters and their moms and their aunts in order to give them the chance to go to school.
And do you think we are seeing something of a sea change in attitudes towards the education of young women and girls in wider society?
It is beginning to change. If you look at the data, you can see, for example, that there are more girls completing primary school, so that's good. But if you look at the wider education landscape, if you look at secondary school, for example, and if you look at the presence of women in leadership positions globally, certainly there's a lot of room for improvement. There's also, I think, globally been a number of things that have happened over the past 18 to 24 months that have really raised the awareness globally. The Me Too movement, I think, has been very eye-opening for people about the extent of sexual harassment in parts of the workplace that people had not necessarily expected. So I think there's a number of things coming together. In the world that I work in, people are coming to realize that the lack of education for girls is a root problem for really advancing on the gender and the overall development agenda.
And what, in your opinion, are the concrete measures that would see an improvement in educational attainment across the world, both in the developed world and the developing world?
I think the first thing on the list is providing more attracting more female teachers. If you look at the makeup of teachers in many of the developing countries, you do see in many countries mostly men. And that has many impacts to it. One is there's obviously sort of a role modeling impact, and the more that young girls can see women teachers in the classroom, it's sort of a signal that let's advance. It also provides a place of safety. We do see sexual-based violence and harassment in places in the education systems, and if there are women in classrooms, that may not occur. Another thing we have to do is build out the capacity of school systems. We do see a fair amount of progress at the primary school level, but when you look at the number of schools that are available and the teachers in those schools in the secondary level, you don't see as much capacity. And so it means the girls have to ride their bikes or walk long distances to get to school, and that creates safety problems. So we have to build out the education system, both in its hard assets, the schools themselves, but also in the soft assets to make sure that there's enough school available for everybody. There's also financing. And then, of course, there's sort of societal and attitude issues that we have to gently chip away on to make sure that people think it's a good thing to send girls to school, which it certainly is.
And this might sound like a rather cynical follow-on, but why is it that the developed world should care about improving educational opportunities for girls and boys in the developing world?
In the developing world, we absolutely should care because education is at the heart of helping countries and societies advance economically, societally, in terms of building democratic systems, health. It's very, very clear. The reason why the developed world should care about it is that the conditions in the developing world have significant ramifications for global conditions. You know, growth, security, health issues. So the G7 has to care about this issue. We're delighted that the French government has put education very much at the top of its agenda. They're a huge supporter of GPE, for which we're immensely grateful, and I applaud their effort to really put education at the top of the agenda.
Alice Albright, CEO of the Global Partnership for Education, thank you very much indeed for coming in to speak to us here on France 24.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A reminder now of our day's top headlines. South Africa's ruling ANC is headed for victory in the country's parliamentary election, although amid a series of corruption scandals and a stagnant economy, support for the party founded by Nelson Mandela is at a record low. And casting a shadow over the future of US-North Korean nuclear talks, Pyongyang launches 2 suspected short-range missiles towards the sea. This as the US seizes a North Korean cargo ship, which Washington says was being used to violate international sanctions.